Sheridan Broadbent, independent director, chairperson, consultant, mentor, and so much more. Your lineup of experience is truly impressive, but what is more impressive to me is the person that Sheridan Broadbent is. It brings me so much joy to be talking with you today. As my mentor over the past few years, you're a force of nature, you're bold, you're brave and beautiful, and a beautiful human being who I've learned so much from, and excited for our community to learn from your wisdom. Without further ado.
Wow. Thank you. Wow.
Cheers.
Wow. Exactly. It's great to be here.
That is an amazing start. I'm very emotional.
Yeah.
You can't hear it. There are tears in the room.
I've got goosebumps.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Very cool.
Okay. So my sort of start is to go for the quick fire questions.
Yeah, right.
So, these are just, a bit of fun, but also usually give us some insights into you. So I'm just going to fire away.
I'm ready.
I'm starting with, what did you want to be when you were younger?
I was asked this question when I was about 3 or 4, I think. And it's, my answer was I wanted to be a boy so I could have a train set. That was my ambition, so there you go.
Awesome. We might come back to that. That's about what breaking some rules, Why do you have to be a boy to have a train set? Anyway, when are you most relaxed?
I'm most relaxed. There's 2 places where I really do feel sort of calm. Like lying in the sun on a beach. That really, to me, is a great way, halfway through reading something awesome. That's super relaxing. Or actually, when I'm on the grid, I race cars, and once you've gone off the dummy grid and driven around the track and you're actually on the grid, ready for the flag to fall down, that's a time for me when I'm just feeling super focused and calm and looking into the middle distance.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you. Do you have a hype ritual?
I sort of do. It'll be music. If I need something to really fire me up and really get the juices flowing, it'll be music. I've got a couple of songs for years that have been my go-to for that. One of them's a song called My Mind's Sedate by a New Zealand band called She Heart. And there's another song by a band called The Only Ones that I listen to as well. Or I can actually just think about those songs and it'll get the blood pumping. Yeah.
Are they like full-on rock bands?
They are. The Only Ones is a very old sort of 70s, 80s English punk band.
Yeah.
They've got this particular song, Another Girl, Another Planet, and that's another really good one that gets me going. And then Rage Against the Machine is probably the third. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Love it. Awesome. Who's your truth teller?
My truth teller is this cousin that's staying at my house at the moment who has kept me awake since Monday last week and has been destroying my liver and kidneys with her enthusiasms. So, she's probably the one who can tell me how it is, and I really trust her advice. But truth telling is contextual, right? Mel, you're a truth teller as well. In the context of when a question is posed, I've got my special ones that I'll go to either professionally or personally. But Liz is probably generally the one that I'm going to take it from the most acceptingly.
That's so cool.
When are you most productive?
When I'm busy. So I'm most productive when I'm in the middle of something. And if I'm in the middle of something boring, I'm uber productive on whatever distracting thing it is that you want me to do. So I tend to fire up a lot more when I'm busy. And when I'm easing off, I'm not very productive. So I do like to keep busy because I can get a lot of other things done at the same time.
So a living example of, if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Exactly right. Yep, precisely.
Cool. On a scale of from 1 to 10, where is your level of self-love?
This is a tough one because I don't sort of think about that kind of stuff much. I'm fine and just, get on with it. So I suppose if 1 is loathing and 10 is absolutely self-loving, I'd probably give myself a solid 6 or 7. But it's not something I tend to dwell upon much. We weren't raised as kids to kind of think about ourselves too much. So it's just, it doesn't occur to me to think that way.
Cool. Last question: book or podcast that you're reading or listening to right now?
I'm a real grazer, which might be code for doesn't finish some of these things. But I'm reading a book at the moment called Deep Purpose by one of my professors from Harvard Business School, Ranjay Gulati. And that's interesting, and it's got case studies in it, so I'm sort of reading it chapter by chapter and then doing other things. And I listen to / watch a couple of podcasts. This one.
Cool.
There's a podcast, and it's a bunch of venture capital jocks from the Valley made good. They're all billionaires and poker players, actually, called All In. And it's annoying, and once you can get off the annoyance of all of this kind of VC machismo, it's interesting. And I'm working with a few early stage firms, and to kind of understand the thinking of these investors and some of the mega trends and so on that they're seeing is really worthwhile. And then for just pure perfect pleasure, the New Yorker fiction podcast is absolutely amazing. And that's kind of an hour's worth of someone reading out a short story, an author reading out a short story by another author they admire, and then they kind of digest it and carve it up afterwards. So half an hour to the gym and half an hour back. That is perfect.
How important is it to you to have that fiction and non-fiction?
Really important.
Yeah.
It's just so nice to escape.
Yeah.
And you know, next to the Gulati book at the moment, I've got a couple of Harvard Business Reviews, and I've got some director magazines and so on. And that's, you know, I enjoy that, but that's kind of work. Fiction is just escapism, and it's nice to admire good writing.
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited. This is a great combo. And just going back to your intro, Mal, it's just so special to see the bond that you guys obviously have through that mentorship. It's it's really special to actually just be in this room and having this combo together.
And it's incredible, you know, I'd say to friends about Mel, the one being mentored is me. I just can't believe you would ever use that name on me, Mel, because when we get together, I come away, my poor husband, who's never met you, right? Oh my God, she's doing this with the business, and this person, and packing this in, and this is where she at. It's just, it really makes me want to be a better person. And, you know, there's few things in life where you come away wanting to be better because that person is so good and so capable, and you think, here I am kind of on my B game. So it's been incredibly helpful for me now. It really has, personally and professionally, actually.
Well, if there weren't tears before.
Seriously, I mean, how fortunate are we, Briar, to just sit in the room and
I know,
kind of see this. It's palpable. Yeah, it's just kind of like, wow.
Yeah, for sure. So from that note, would love to ask this great open question. Who is Sheridan? I'd love if you could introduce yourself, your passions, your career background, and what life looks like now.
Okay, so my name's Sheridan Broadbent. I'm 54 years old. I was born and raised in Auckland here, from a sort of pretty normal Kiwi family. You know, went to Mount Wellington is where we're from, right? Panmure District School, what was then called Penrose High School, which is now One Tree Hill College. You know, played hockey at school, but I've always been a real tomboy. My brothers are a bit older than me, 8 and 10 years older, and have always been very aspirational. Hence the comment about the train set, because they had train set, and I wasn't allowed to play with the train set. I was so much younger and clumsy, I guess I've been making it up, since then. I've never really had a career plan. I've never really had a personal plan for myself. I just sort of went along with what felt interesting. And so my passions now are kind of potential, professionally, you know, how to bring out potential from yourself, from a business, from a market, from an opportunity. And, you know, personally, I just absolutely love motorsports. And I have since I was a dot. And it's nice to be in the situation now, even though it's complete amateur hour on the racetrack when you're with me, but to be actually doing it, you know, and to be out there giving it a go. So, professionally, I guess I've kind of followed my nose. So I left school at 16, and because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and we were from quite a you know, my father had done really well with the cleaning business he'd owned, but we're from quite a working class background. So university and further education just wasn't a thing for us. Trades we were all about the trades in my family, but going to university was for people who are up themselves, you know. So I left to become an office junior. I sort of felt that I wanted to do something in computers, you know, like being a computer operator, as they were called in the 80s, or maybe a systems analyst, but I don't think I was smart enough for that. So I left, became an office junior for a couple of years, and then thanks to just having great bosses, I could see myself maybe going to university, and I was surrounded. I worked in the IT. So my first job was with an IT company in the 80s in Newmarket.
Wow.
Yeah, it was incredible, right? So I was copying big 5 1/4 inch discs, and, you know, these computers that had way less memory than my Fitbit got, you know, doing your thing and answering the phones and doing the banking. But the company, sadly, brilliant genius company called Interactive Applications Limited, and they had this software suite for small to medium businesses called the Charter Series, and they had payroll and you know, general ledger and job costing and all of these modules. It was absolutely the platform, you know, like zero much, but this is the 80s. Really super innovative. The guy Phil Norman, one of the guys that founded it, is still out there. You know, he's on the board of Plexure, carving up the issues these days. But this is the 80s with this fantastic New Zealand-made software that we were selling all over the world. But times got tough. It got bought by NZI Insurance, bizarrely, became named Paxis, and they went progressively broke for reasons I don't understand. I was 16, 17. But as they got less financially solvent, and I was being paid, you know, I started there at $8,750 a year. And because I was the cheapest person in the building, they just kept making people redundant and giving me more support.
Giving you more to do.
So I ended up in this really awesome role as dispatching supply coordinator, being paid $10,700. And but had all of this responsibility, and I thought it was because I was awesome, but of course I look back now and go, you bloody cheapskates. I just had such great experience, and when they actually had to shut the whole business down, and I got another job with some of the staff who'd gone and set their own really super innovative business up, and I was typing up the marketing brochure for them one day, Phoenix Software they were called, and they were out at a customer function. The whole company was out because there's only about 15 of us, but they were all out. I'm in the office typing up the marketing brochure. They're out boozing and having fun because it's now the late 80s where you boozed and had fun, you know, during the day. And so they're out having a great time. I'm in there by myself, and while I'm typing up the marketing brochure, I realise everyone's got degrees except me. So they're out having fun and living their best lives. I'm sitting in the office typing the brochure, and I thought, So I had a discussion with my then boss, Grant Forsyth, who's been a great mentor on and off. And he and the other owner really encouraged me to go to university. So I left, I worked there part-time and did a commerce degree. And that's then kind of led, you know, these people who back you when you're young, they don't realise the consequences that what probably seemed to them like nothing have on your entire life. And I think the great thing about education, I'm a bit passionate about it now, is it helps you self-identify as a high-achieving person. And I've never, ever identified myself as a high-achieving person. I've never won anything. So it just helped me in so many ways. And their tiny little decisions set me off, you know, on this course of events. Incredible.
And I love that you don't or you didn't have a plan, because everything, all the podcasts, all the books, everything that you listen to, read, it's like you must have a plan. You must have your 3 month, your 1 year, your 5 year. And for me, that almost makes me feel guilty. I kind of have a plan. I kind of know where I want to go. But when I constantly hear it and read it, it makes me feel bad about myself that I don't have a structured plan. So it's great to hear that you don't and you haven't.
Well, and yet what I'm hearing, and you know, Sheridan way better than I mean, is that you know what's important to you. And in the absence of a plan, that's really important, because what are you mapping decisions onto? If it's not a plan, it's I know this is important to me, and doing this will give me that or help me achieve that or whatever. So
yeah,
which is,
and I know what I like. I guess so you know, if I like something, I want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
But look, particularly when you're developing your career, it's all about the people you work with. It is all about the people you work with. And if you're working with good people who give you a chance as a young person and chuck a few big projects your way and let you make a few mistakes without feeling like a complete idiot, you flourish. And I've just been so fortunate to have great people around me in the formative stages of my career that have given me a chance.
So special. That's cool. I love that. Going back to fast cars, your passion and love for cars. Tell us a bit more about this and what's your thinking like? What's your thinking like before a race and maybe during the race? And is this any different to you in more of a leadership or work mode or perspective?
It is the closest thing to yoga, you know, like to meditation you'll ever get to. And it's funny, the better my cars I've got, it's not all been fast cars. Some of my first race car was a bit of a pig actually, but it was, you know, a hard case car. Because you have to focus, and I'm not good at focusing. I'm a bit scatterbrained, and I've got a short attention span, and I'm always thinking multiple thoughts. Yeah. But you have to focus, and particularly now I'm a bit older, right? And you're racing against kids who've got 100% of their mental horsepower at their convenience, and good brain to muscle coordination, all this sort of high performance stuff that you need if you're going to push yourself to the limit. And I'm sure it's like any sport, skiing, you know, where if you're off your oats, you're probably going to get injured, or you're at least not going to ski as well as you can, right? Mel, you're a skier. Whereas if you're on your game, you are definitely going to be successful. And it's actually really helped me professionally in terms of making me appreciate how much more powerful you are when you can focus. With race driving, one thing I've learned, which it's taken me, 50-something years to learn it, is patience. And when you're racing, say you're in an 8-lap race or a longer race in particular, you don't have to overtake everyone on that first lap. You don't have to sort it out on the start grid. You can pick your people, and I tend to race with people. I kind of know how they're going to drive and how their car behaves. And you can wait and bide your time so that you can optimise how you're going to come out of that situation to pass them. And that's been a late lesson coming for me in racing and in life, actually, is to sometimes just bide your time, because the outcome will be so much better if you do something at the optimal moment rather than too early. And I've spun out and had a lot of incidents because I did things too early, and I've put my career sideways because I either did things too early or took on an issue that I either didn't need to take on, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, or needed to wait. And also, sometimes professionally, when you see something that you don't agree with, or you think something could be better, or you want to make a point, sometimes the person will come to that conclusion themselves, Sheridan. You don't need to tell them. As my husband sometimes says to me, you don't have to speak out every thought that's in your head. Sometimes we're thinking. So
sometimes got to have a filter.
It's just sometimes, and it's more powerful when others come to their own conclusions. So it's been a good lesson.
How do you know when the optimal moment or time is, either on the racetrack or
on the racetrack? You just know. Know because you're driving in your bum and your fingertips, so everything is sensory. So I couldn't tell you, but I just know, and every time I've had that feeling, it's worked.
Intuition. And
because I've done lots of racing over the years, it's like muscle memory, right? That you do it enough, and you become a guitarist like John Lennon, right? Through repetition. So with my professional life, I don't know, Mel. I'm still getting it wrong as much as I'm getting it right. So that optimal time, who knows?
Love that.
And there's probably a bit of the saying though, because the more you do it and experience things, the more you'll feel whether something is right.
That's right.
Which
the spidey sense.
Fingertips
exactly.
of business. It's like, this feels like the right time to say this or do this, or it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I love that though. I don't know, it's such a powerful answer back. It's like, yeah, actually we are human. This is quite a cool question. Is your attitude on the track any different to the boardroom, and are you treated any differently?
It's such an interesting analogy, and it's interesting that you've picked this up too. So on the racetrack, I do notice, and I use this to my advantage, on the actual track, the guys don't really like being overtaken by a girl. And so I'll ham that up a bit. If you start to get in people's mirrors and go left and right, and they'll know it's that annoying short girl in the BMW, they'll make a mistake. And if you can force a mistake, life is good. Right? And I don't want anyone, it's not crashing off the track. It's just they'll go on the wrong line or they miss a gear or something, but it forces a mistake, and that's an easy way to sort of get past. And I love doing that, and I ham it up a bit with the races as well, in terms of referring to myself as the middle-aged woman's business league. You got overtaken by the middle-aged women's business league. Not cool. But
Soften the wounds.
But in the pits, on the side of the racetrack, it has been such an incredible experience for me. And I used to go along by myself, and my first race car was a big old 1970s Valiant, big bogan wagon, and notoriously unreliable. I've gone around the front corner at Pukeko back straight onto Castrol and pulled the gear stick out in my hand.
Oh my God.
That's how much this car let me down.
Then you're racing in the Valiant.
And holding the gear stick in my hand, going, even I know this isn't cool. And all the guys I raced with, because in those days it was guys, were just so awesomely helpful. They just got in and helped, and I never ever felt any sexism in that regard. It's just I know on the track their behaviour. Professionally, look, we're getting there. Everyone's got their biases. I've got my biases as well. I've worked in male-dominated industries, but again, I've always been lucky to have, my direct boss, who generally was awesome. And when at least one person in the vicinity, maybe not even in the room, has got your back, anything's possible. I talk about Dumbo's feather, and I've spoken to you, Mel, about Dumbo's feather, where, I don't know if you know the story of Dumbo, it's an old Disney story. He had big ears and he could fly, and he thought he needed to hold the feather in his trunk to fly. But Dumbo didn't need to hold the feather. The feather was just a talisman for him, right? And then one day when he's flying, he drops the feather and but he can fly. And sometimes just having that one person who you can bring to mind that's got your back gives you that push to be successful. So I have probably put up with some challenges, and I've probably been a huge challenge. Diversity's hard work, and it works both ways. But I've always had at least one person who I know is on my team, and that's really, really mattered.
You've had your Dumbo's feather.
I have.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes have you had to, they may not have been someone there in the minute or in the organisation, but they're in your past, and you can just,
they're in your head. You can bring them forward. To give you that confidence. And a lot of it is just about confidence, where you're in a situation and you can feel your confidence eroding, and then you think of someone who would give you a boost and think, no, I'm here, I've got to give this 100% and be my best, so I can press on.
That's so cool. You've led a number of large teams in your time. What is your leadership style, and has it changed over the years? If so, why and how?
I'm a very direct, driven, high energy, kind of full-on leader, and I have had to change that a lot, because I say what I think, and I think out loud. So I like to have a debate and an argument. I can talk a good game, and I like to think through things out loud, and that can be very, very off-putting and very stressful for people. And I've never meant it to be, but everyone's different. So I've really had to learn to temper that and use it as a superpower as opposed to just a default position every day, because it can be quite exhausting. And as I've become more senior, letting people do their own thing right, and make their own mistakes, and creating an environment where they can goof around with their own style, I think has been the big learning for me. That, yep, it's not how I would have done it, but did they get the job done? Yes, they did. Is it a fairly good outcome? Yes, it is. And have they learned some lessons they can take forward? Yes, they can. So I've had to learn to really back off, and that's been a good lesson. It really has been. But look, it's one I have to remind myself every day. And if any of my board colleagues were listening to this podcast, I'm sure they would be thinking in their heads, yeah, she hasn't perfected that one.
But it's so important to be your authentic self, right?
Yes.
Especially at the board level.
Yeah.
Because that's why you're appointed to that board.
Yeah, but it's interesting, someone interviews you for a couple of hours and appoints you to something, and with boards, it's a long-term gig.
Yeah.
You can be on these boards for 10 years. I was on the board of Cordia for 8 years. So you're kind of stuck with each other, and after a reasonably short engagement, and a board does need to be a high-performing team. It's not just about, work teams that are together 40 hours a week or whatever that need to be high-performing teams. Boards need to be high-performing teams, and that takes work, and you've got to have a great relationship and trust each other. So look, I'm sure a few have put me onto boards where they've deeply regretted their decision, and one of those boards where they told me they deeply regretted the decision. The diversity just didn't work. Sometimes diversity is not worth the squeeze, and people aren't, don't want to really do what they said they wanted to do. They just want to get on with what they want to do, and that's fine. If you own the business, you can do whatever you want, right? Yeah. I don't agree with it, but that's your decision to take. But boards now, particularly of publicly listed companies and large firms, need to commit to diversity, need to commit to the fact that it's a bit of a hassle. We'd all love to agree and have a nice time and then go home early, but if we're going to get the best out of each other, there will be times when we disagree, and when we have to really work through that disagreement, and there might be times when some of us actually get a bit cross with the disagreement, a bit wound up about it, and you've got to work through that. And I really enjoy that aspect, actually, that dynamic of being on boards. But I've got to say, one of my chairs in particular, my chair at Cordia, John Quirk, he had to put a lot of time into me to balance out my enthusiasms.
Wow. Self-aware though, like you saying that, you're like, okay, obviously you've learned a lot about yourself through sitting on boards.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Like I have.
Yeah.
But self-aware in hindsight, I guess, is my strength. In the moment, sometimes I think, and I can feel it coming on. I'll be thinking, don't say this, don't say this, blah 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 blah.
Right.
And sometimes it works out, but sometimes it doesn't. So I'm still learning every day.
But isn't that important to building a strong business and having that diversity of thought?
Yes, it is. It really is. And I'm on the board of an early stage company, and we've recently brought in a new director. She's US based and just an absolute dynamo.
Yeah.
She's amazing. And she's brought a real difference of opinion. She's a really positive, upbeat person, so you could never ever take any offence by anything she says. But she will say the opposite to what everyone else in the room is saying. And she's just got a great way of positing the counterfactual that gets the best out of everyone else around the boardroom table. So that diversity has it made board meetings easier and more relaxing? No. Has it made us a better board? Oh my God.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fundamentally shifted the conversation.
Yeah, and we could all take so much learning from that. I mean, having grown up in the States, maybe I was used to it, but when I got here, it took me a long time to understand why people don't have arguments or contentious debates.
Yeah.
It's just like, we get a better outcome, and just, like you've heard me say, Briar, just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I don't like you.
Exactly.
I just don't agree with you.
Yeah.
And I'm prepared to tell you that.
Yeah.
So I think examples like that, Sheridan, are just more people can see that and see it end up in better place,
Yeah.
the more they'll be encouraged to try and do the same.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And when you've got like her, a role model who's very effective in terms of how she delivers that message, she's super effective. I try and plot her sort of, and they're not her techniques, it's just what she's like. It's what she's like 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
But, I just watch how effective it is on others and think, wow, that's really superpower that you've got going on there.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Going, sort of darting around a little bit, but this came to mind. Your industries are so diverse in themselves. You've got telecommunications more recently, you've got engineering, energy, transport. What do you... well, first of all, why those different industries, and was that a thing that you set out to do or sort of fell? And also, what do you bring to the table, and how do you do things differently to elevate those different industries? Because I can imagine sitting in a boardroom around energy and then the next day around telecommunications. Are there similarities? Are there differences?
So I kind of fell into it. I was working as a territory manager and trainer for the Lotteries Commission in the 90s before going on my big OE. And the Lotteries Commission was amazing because we were all young. It was a newish company. We got heaps of training. We had a lot of fun. We were naughty. It was, it was really cool. I was on the road. But I left that, spent a year or two overseas, and when I came back, the first job I got was with a company called Telecom New Zealand. And I was a territory manager in the payphones business, right? And it was just one of a few jobs that I was offered. The other one was with a company called Bell South, which has become Vodafone. So it just ended up that the two offers I had were both in the same sector. They were both territory manager, kind of regional sales manager kind of roles. And I took the telecom one because I liked the person better, and that was the best, or one of the best professional decisions I've ever made. This guy Bruce Buttercombe was absolutely fantastic and really empowering, super high IQ guy. So that was a role that got me into telecommunications. And once you're in the infrastructure sector, for me, it really matters. Things we were doing that I wasn't doing, but people around me were doing, like, the $5 weekend. Gosh, $5 and you can talk as long as you want to Australia. I mean, you look back on that in hindsight and go, God, that was so expensive. Whatever.
I was just going to say, do we need to explain to some of the younger listeners what a payphone is?
And there's still 2,700 payphones out there, Melanie.
Don't I know there's one in Arrowtown. I saw it the other day.
But it's interesting, even in the 90s, because I loved that payphones business and, understanding the detail behind it. And Bruce, my boss, was the former head of audit for Telecom New Zealand, so he's a real geek for numbers. And I'd never been sort of a geek for numbers, but to get into the details and understand the drivers of things, what drives this, the heart of this gives you insight to how things work. And that got me started on this kind of lifelong journey for needing to understand how things work before I'm happy to start strategizing about what the future might look like, is do a real deep dive and understand how you can flex change and value to create, success. And we also got McKinsey in when I was at Telecom, who went through this whole Lean Six Sigma process, and we used all of these, learned all of these amazing techniques, 5 Whys, and some of the Six Sigma, how you break down processes and reconstruct them and so on. So I filled up the toolbox when I was at Telecom, and I just love infrastructure and the effect that good infrastructure has on society, on international competitiveness, the people that you meet. I really love a company that's in an established sector with a big workforce of technical people out there doing the hard yards. That's what I loved about Downer. I loved Downer. That's what I loved about Canny's Power, is you're keeping the lights on, keeping the dial tone going, while everyone's getting on with their important business.
Yeah. And you forget when you turn the light switch on.
Yeah.
Everything else.
The magic happens.
Yeah.
So it's an enabler for a high performance society, and that's what I absolutely love about it.
I love that.
That's so cool. I love that you said you deep dive into the business, into the industry really, before you then take that bird's eye view, which I'm assuming would be more of a boardroom discussion.
Definitely.
Around direction and vision. You've got to know how it functions first.
And at really basic level, because I'm not a scientist, and when I first got the job as Chief Executive of Counties Power, I know nothing about electricity, right? I knew that it had poles, and we had poles in telecom, and that it kills you, I knew that much. But I love a great stick figure, and my engineer, one of them in particular, was just so brilliant and patient. And I'd be like, okay, so draw it up for me. The man presses the toast and presses the toaster down, and then what happens?
Wow.
And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? All the way back to the hydro dam. So, and Jeff would be able to just map out these little stick figure interactions and these aspects of the network, and this is how it works, and also be smart enough to say, and then some magic happens, we'll just call it a black box, you don't need to know, and then this happens. So I have been a deep diver. It sometimes drives people crazy, but once I've kind of got an understanding of the key things that need to happen, it does make strategising about the future so much easier.
Do you think we are a high performance society at the moment?
But in some ways, yes, I think we are. I think we limit ourselves. I think in this country, ego is seen as such a bad thing. I think, don't poke your head up because you'll be taken out. And look, I think these days, thank God I'm not a teenager in the current time, right? I think there is a lot of that out there, and not just in New Zealand. I think any country in the world, people who poke their head up are prone to get that head chopped off, which is just terrible for the future. I worry about it actually. But I think New Zealand, we're a low ambition, high contentment kind of culture, and that's good or bad. I mean, in terms of our long-term international competitiveness, that's bad. In terms of our consumption of stuff like electricity or consumer goods or what we're buying or our aspirations, I think that's quite a good thing. So there's a lot of criticism of the BMW, the badge and the boat. But hey, if that's your ambition and you achieve it, yay for you. But I think a lot of small to medium businesses in this country are languish because of that thinking, and I think a lot of founders should be encouraged to think about succession for their business, whether it's people who are working for them or selling it to someone or selling it offshore. And we're not great here at understanding IP that we're creating and valuing IP in everything we do in business. And wanting that IP to sort of move into the future. I'm on the board and next week become the chair of a pipeline and civil firm called Pipeline and Civil.
That is on your LinkedIn.
It is on my LinkedIn. Awesome mid-sized civil construction firm specialising in 3 waters, based out in West Auckland, and the guy that owned it has turned it into an employee-owned business because he wants it to continue. So he's potentially handed off a lot of value. It's got a great reputation, this business, awesome safety culture, I absolutely love it. And but he has been prepared to basically set this business up so he can hand it on to the employees. And that's hugely powerful, right? He could have just flogged it off to one of his big large competitors who would have grabbed it with both hands because they've got some really talented people in that business, and they have a great reputation. They punch way above their weight, but that's not what he chose to do. So if there were more founders like him out there thinking about society and thinking about their staff and thinking about the possibilities, I think we would be a more internationally competitive, high performance society.
Interesting. Very interesting.
What are some of the changes you've seen over the past decade when it comes to the boardroom, and maybe things in a similar vein that we need to work on as a nation when it comes to the boardroom?
I think we need to be clear about what our objectives are for our companies. I've seen a lot of change. Diversity is rightly so a hot topic. Stakeholder engagement and in some cases stakeholder representation around the board is important, and understanding that you are accountable for more than just your financial performance is really important. So sustainability with a small case S, like the ability of your business to be successful long term, is something that all boards and shareholders should be thinking about for their companies. And also, having good governance, being environmentally smart and looking after your stuff, right, and using as few resources, irreplaceable resources, as you possibly can, is really, really important. But also, we are there to run a high-performance business, and we need high-performance people sitting around the table as well. So while it is really important to progress towards, equal gender around the boardroom table, a lot of people arc up about this, to have diversity of thought and lived experience around that table, we need to be unified in our passion for that business being high performance. And I am seeing a couple of boards where they're ticking the box in terms of representing all their interest groups, but they don't have people around that table who can really take that business into the future. And the more and more I work with companies that are internationally competitive, and particularly SaferMe, an early stage firm, and through some of the stakeholders of that business in the States, the more you think, man, we're quite cloistered here in terms of the possibilities for our businesses and the ambitions. So to be talking about $1 billion early stage business over there, in Texas or California's nothing. We're all talking about that. Whereas over here, you're a fantasist if that's how you're thinking. And, I do think that we need, if I owned a business and I was building a board to sit on that, I would want diversity, I would want representation, but I would want talent, and I would want ambition as well.
How do we take a step back? One of the reasons why we started this podcast was that very reason around New Zealanders not celebrating success enough, and that's what we want to do, is celebrate success and learn from it and really encourage it. How do we take this further across New Zealand? How do we celebrate success, and how do we think bigger? Like $1 billion. What are we doing about that, and what can we do about that?
Look, New Zealand is a great place to live, and we're part of the world, and I think we need to bring the world in. Is how can we have more? And look, we've got some unbelievable talent in this country, right? But how can we also access unbelievable talent from offshore, even if it's only to inspire us and realise it's what's possible? And the thing I like about what you guys are doing here is when you hear someone telling their story about their amazing business that they've started in the States, their serial entrepreneurship, I didn't really have a plan, but then we did this, that and the other. And you think, my God. I was watching the last pod and just having my mind blown. It makes you realise that it could be possible for me, and that does sound like a bit like my background, and maybe I'll have a go. So I think it's really having more, I wouldn't say role models, but more examples and case studies of real humans with a beating heart who make mistakes and don't quite know what they're doing awesome stuff. And I think also here we need to move our narrative nationally around failure, around the consequences of failure. The consequences of failure are a great education. And as long as you're not taking too many people down with you, and as long as you're taking lessons and then taking that forward into some good stuff and behaving honestly and with integrity, then go for it. Have a few duds, I've had my fair share of failures, and maybe a couple of them I wish hadn't been failures. But, there are a couple of spectacular failures that I've just learned so much with, that have really shaped future decisions that I've been able to make on the basis of that. So, I think we've got to ease up on the consequences of failure in this country and go, yep, that's correct, but here's what they've taken from it, and they're moving on. And certainly with early stage businesses, you're not going to get everyone right, but you might find that unicorn, or also you might find that $20 million a year business, and that is fantastic too. There is nothing wrong with a medium-sized enterprise. They are the beating heart of our economy.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast this morning actually, and it was a guy from the States, and he's like, a failure actually in the States is a badge of honour. It's something that it's a fail, and then you go back to the big corporate, get more experience, and then you go and try again. Whereas here, completely different. And that's another reason why we started this podcast as well. I remember that conversation. It's like, celebrate success, talk about our failures, let's open up about it, and let's be brave about it, and start that conversation. So
and I think in some cases celebrate failure. You know, one of my big failures in terms of the consequences of it were, and look, I don't blame myself personally 100% for it, but when I was running Downer, so I used to run the engineering business, right? And in New Zealand, when there was such a thing, now it's just a big infrastructure company. Great company to work for, loved it. And my biggest customer was Chorus. And we were renegotiating our contract with Chorus, which was really a 10-year evergreen big deal. And Chorus, there was us and a company that was then called Transfield, which is now Ventia, that we were competing against. And the two of us that had half the market each, right? And we were good competitors. We'd go hard against each other, but Chorus wanted a third, and they brought a company in from Australia, and I lost Auckland, right? My head office patch, so I lost the Auckland patch, and 500 staff had no jobs because of losing this negotiation, right? Now imagine how that feels when you've been leading the charge for this team. They all knew the negotiation was on because it was existential for us. And we had to bring everyone together on the same day. The client wouldn't let us. We were told, me and my DRs, initially just myself and my Australasian boss, and then me and my DRs were told about a week beforehand that we had to keep it to ourselves, like how you can ever keep anything we did. And then my boss Hamish, he had, I think he had the Ellerslie racecourse, and I had Eden Park, and we had half the staff each. And we told them at the same minute and time, right? This is what's happened.
Wow.
And it's not very funny, you know. Like this is the grim reality. We've kind of got X months to do the transition. Most of you are going to get great jobs with the incoming, and it's going to be amazing. But they knew, and it was just disastrous, right? And the incomer, a large part of the workforce, were going to have to work as self-employed owner-operators, man and van. And when you're 57 years old with a bit of a bad back because you've been cable jointing in a trench for your whole career, you're not going to get the money that you've got to invest in your van and your equipment and that's not going to happen for you. And some of these guys could see that they were never going to work again, right? And I needed to let a lot of them feel like it was absolutely my fault. You know, I resigned from Downer on the consequence of that. You can't sort of move on from something like that without there being consequences. And people need to see that there's consequences right across the business. Now, look, I signed a $1 billion contract, as you know, I've talked about, sort of like that pen with Chorus. So we picked up other patches and it was happily ever after. But we lost the Auckland patch. There's a message there for you in terms of customer intimacy when you lose your head office patch and they know that's where your head office is. And you lose, and it was a peach too. Auckland was an absolute peach of the market, and Northland, but Auckland in particular. And our guys have been working there their whole careers. So that was a disaster. Now, most of them went and got jobs and probably never looked back, right? But the victory that I took from that is my team, my direct reports, had to dig deep, and we had to exit this relationship. We had to be the good guys with the incoming Australian bunch of jerks. But it wasn't their fault that they won, you know. They were all keen beans, so we're all being happy friends together. I was really angry at the client, which was unreasonable, but you know, we're emotional beings. It was just such a terrible time for us all, but we had to be nice friends and all play nicely. And then we had to exit contracts, we had to move staff, we had to sell vans, we had all this logistical nightmare. And my team hired the old Todd car assembly sort of rundown plant out in Otahu in South Down. We had all these warehouses, and I remember this one particular day as we were just working through, we were just 7 days a week for about 6 weeks in a on the trot. Out of my DRs, 11 out of 12 DRs, we just went for it the whole time. And this one particular couple of days where all of the people with vans and fleet and gear in their vans were full of tools, had to drive in, you went to the first station, you had the tools logged out, then you drove to the next station, and if your car was going back to the lease firm, it got parked there. If your car was being kept by Downer, it got parked there. And if you were going to be buying your van, because you were going to work for the new guys, it got parked over there. You know, and then they kind of went around and then went and got their van and then sort of bought tools off us and so on. But it was a pretty devastating scene, because a lot of those people, we had a mini bus, because we're busing people to their house on their last day of work. Can you imagine? And I couldn't add a lot of value to the tool process and all that, so I was in a big old raincoat doing the washing the fleet, water blasting the cars and so on. That's all I could do to help, but I really felt the need to be there with these people. And I drove the minivan a couple of times. Yeah. And I remember these really angry guys. They were so furious with me for letting them down and, you know, ruining their lives. And I was driving them home, and a couple of them lived in Glen Innes. I'm from Mount Wellington, right? And it just so happened we drove past my house. So from Otahu, past my house, through to where they were in one of them was in Mount Wellington, one of them was in GI. And they're swearing at the background, and I'm really angry. And I said, oh, look, there's my childhood home, you know, just FYI. And just chit-chatting. And on this drive, we realised that we had exactly the same backgrounds. You know, our schools had done school sports together. We'd probably knew each other. You know, I had my opportunity to talk to them, and they had their opportunity to see that we were all in the same boat, right? And that day for me was just, I was so proud of my unbelievable team for what they'd put together, and the dignity and respect they showed, you know, all of those staff, and the diligence and how brainy and hard-working they were. God, I had a great team. But also how tenacious these people were inside themselves, that you know, I remember dropping the last one off, the most angry one, and he got out and I got out, and he shook my hand and he said to me, I'm going to be fine. Wow. And it was just such a moment, you know, and I just, when I got back into the high ace and bumbled back. But that for me, you know, I look back on that as being a highlight, even though it was an absolute disaster, because I learned so much, and I learned so much about people, what teams are capable of, and myself, you know, what you can, at the end of it all, kind of survive, because I survived. And then I woke up the next day, you know.
You survived, Sheridan, but the vulnerability there, like, you made yourself so vulnerable.
Well, we're all on a low ebb. You know, I talked about my last 8 days of socialising. We weren't sleeping, you know, this team, we're just getting up in the morning, trudging to the office, dealing with a big false happy smile. So we were all, you know, everyone was vulnerable because they were hanging by a thread.
And that's got to come out somehow.
It was pretty emotional.
Holding on for dear life.
Yeah. But listen in on this, you know, anybody who's going to be listening in on this, because that ability to be vulnerable like that, instead of just pretend, either hide or, you know, just
fronting up.
Just not what everybody can do.
Yeah. And you would have had a team around you for that deal, so it's not your responsibility, but you've taken that responsibility. You would have had a team around you that also lost that deal.
Oh, and they would just
Sheridan
is it was zero to do with my team. They really deserved the win, but I get where the customer was at. And I remember we had Downer had Telstra and Vodafone as customers as well, and I remember the chief executive at the time, Alan Freeth, talking me off the edge of the building, you know, afterwards, and he said to me, "You're never going to win it. Don't worry about it, right? Don't take this to the grave." I did kind of, and in the end I moved to Sydney because I just couldn't bear to see the company that had come to New Zealand. I couldn't bear to see their vans out there. It just I was just so upset. We went and lived over there for a couple of years and came back. But yeah, it was really neat advice from him to take the time to say to me, just, you've got to let this go.
Give you an opportunity to heal and forgive yourself.
I needed to heal. And Sydney was great for that. As it turned out, I ended up back with Downer over there, which hadn't been the plan. But it was lovely to heal. I love that. Such a human moment though of you going, there's my childhood home. And it's sort of this full circle moment of, we're all humans and and this is a mistake and but just really wholesome moment. We're all the same. Exactly.
Got a beating heart too.
Exactly. Thanks for sharing that vulnerability because like Mel was saying, you've got to share the failures and the learnings from it and the successes. So, Any what's your proudest moment in your career to date?
That day holding the water blast and looking at my gorgeous, luscious team just giving 100%. Was I've never been. I'm not a person, again, because of how we raise. We're not. The Broadbents aren't proud of themselves. But I looked at that team and thought, if these people are prepared to work for me, and I'd inherited this team, by the way, so I can really not take credit for them, but they stuck with me, then life is good. Then I can get through today and I can get through tomorrow because these people are just smashing it out of the park and they don't even know how good they are. Typical New Zealand leaders.
You know what I mean? Like, they're all leaders in their own right because leadership is a process, not a position, but that doesn't happen by chance.
No. Exactly.
That's interesting.
Wow.
What is the change that you want to make in the world, or your purpose?
My purpose? I don't know. I haven't really, here I am reading a book called Deep Purpose because I've never really had a plan, and this sounds stupid, but I've never found it's my place to have like a purpose. But, I do feel my role professionally is to be Dumbo's feather. And if people can believe and people can think about possibilities, not plausibilities, and look, I can bring them crashing back to earth with some dreary realities, but if you can pass that feather over to people and they can believe they can fly, I think that is a great purpose. And also it sounds kind of like a pretty easy thing to do, so not too many action points for me. So if I can do that, that's fantastic. And in terms of professionally, and personally actually, I'd like to be thought of as a person who's given it a nudge. Who's given life and work a good go, and kind of done their best.
That's so inspiring. Vision.
Pass the Dumbo feather, I say.
And I feel like that comes out in your experience of sitting on boards and being independent directors and that sort of thing. It's exactly sort of that purpose. Whether you've written it down before or it's just ingrained in you, it's coming out in what you're doing professionally, which is so cool. To sort of being able to have a conversation around.
I'd like to think so. Again, it's hard to talk about yourself. It's better to talk to other people about you because that's probably a more realistic reflection. But that's certainly my fantasy. So I hope I can achieve some of it.
I think you already are. Just saying.
We like to end the conversation with allowing you an opportunity to thank someone that's been influential in your world. Is there anyone that comes to mind that you'd like to thank?
I've had so many influences. I've just been so lucky, and I guess I've been a bit of a sponge with great people. But look, that first boss at Telecom, Bruce Buttercombe, he was great with me, and he knew how to keep me on track, but he gave me lots of good opportunities. And I remember once, having achieved something that I never thought I could achieve, I said to him, "How did you know I'd be able to do that?" He said, "I had no idea how you were going to get it done, but I figured, what's the worst thing that could happen?" So, he was fantastic with me, and so he's shifted the dial. And there's a couple of others who believed in me, Grant Forsyth, who was the one who said, "Of course you should go to university and we can give you a bit of part-time work." He set a course of events going for me. And my leader at Downer, Hamish Gill, who employed me for that role. You know, I still look back on that and think, wow, that was a real risk for them, because I'm running, at the time it was 1,200 people, we grew it to 1,700, so it's a big business of telco people, and you bring in someone who's not an engineer, who hasn't run a giant workforce like this, but who talks a good game and had a good relationship with telecom through, you know, all of the years that I'd worked there. Not good enough to keep the Auckland patch, as it turned out, but we didn't know that at the time. And you take a chance and give me the job. And I came in after that job application had closed as well. So they really pushed it out of the barge to give me that job. And if Hamish hadn't have given me what was my big break, I don't know what I'd be doing now. I certainly wouldn't be on the board of Spark, of Manawa. I certainly wouldn't have, you know, I've travelled the world with some of the things I've done. And Hamish took a chance, a big chance. So I'm very, very grateful. And lastly, you know, so this isn't one person, my husband, he's enabled me, right? He's just left me to it. And he doesn't care about, he's not interested in business or, you know, professional life or material possessions or any of that stuff. But if it makes me happy, he's into it and he's with me 100%. He's a football player, he used to be a football player, so he couldn't have cared less about motorsports. And he only got into it because he didn't want to be standing on the sidelines, you know, so now he races a little bit as well, but he's putting himself back on the sidelines to support me now. So he's just been the greatest enabler of me. So yeah, I'm super lucky.
That's just awesome.
So
Wow.
thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and gold and your and being vulnerable with us.
Oh, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been exciting to think about coming in here, having watched the podcast. And Mel, it's always just joy to sit in a room with you.
Well, just for the record, you are my Dumbo feather. So I actually forgot about you telling me about the Dumbo feather. That was a while ago. So thank you for bringing that back. Yeah.
I just forgot the story.
Yeah.
I know Dumbo. I just forgot the story, and now I'm gonna. Wow.
And like I've learnt so much off you, but today it just keeps coming. It's just brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
I feel like we could sit in this room for 4 hours.
Yes.
I would send you like a whole nother tomorrow if you'd like that.
Sheridan Part 2.
Yeah, hey, watch this space. Yeah.